There is only one truth. However, the amounts reached are vast, and no matter which path you choose, when you delve deep enough, you realize that all paths converge at the same point. Reality is exactly like that. It is approached from different angles, explained with different concepts, yields results from different disciplines, but the answer ultimately remains the same. This awareness begins the moment you understand that the mind is not only a learning structure, but also an access structure. Because the human mind not only processes what is known, it can also touch layers of information that have not yet been named, measured, or made visible. With this awareness of communication, the perception of life changes completely. The reality you imagined existing within a global currency was actually no different from a much larger currency, a small entity. This new realm spoke not of matter, but of consciousness, and the framework you knew through computers was insufficient to understand it. Multiple models seem possible for this to happen, as if there were different states of reality. But as we delve deeper into what is presented and observed over time, the production of these models consistently points to a single fundamental principle. There is no other answer. Ultimately, this is about surviving in the present. What is the meaning of life? The answer is not complex, but rather profound. The meaning of life is to evolve toward love and to grow as consciousness. People are involved in this process. Life doesn't always change when your perspective changes, because you no longer see events as things originating from you, but as part of the development of your consciousness. At this point, life becomes a field of progress, and within this field, people mature, becoming more balanced, more meaningful, and more fulfilling. This approach is not just a simple thought. It is also a more comprehensive explanation of how reality emerges. Because at the most fundamental level, the building blocks of the physical world are not as solid and material as we imagine. What emerges when we descend to the smallest scales is not matter, but deepened and expanded patterns of information. What exists in the continuum of reality is not the object. It is calculable states and probabilities. What we know as information must have flexible properties. Everything that can be shaped exists within a system. This does not inevitably lead to the conclusion that reality is a calculable construct. If it's calculable, it's designed, and something produced cannot exist otherwise. Therefore, the universe is not a solid field of matter existing on its own. It is a conscious, genetically based, calculated field of experience. This idea may be unsettling at first. Humans have long existed within an absolute, unchanging, and central physical reality. Yet throughout history, major transformations have always occurred in the same way. People first accept their own perspective as absolute, then realize it's merely an interpretation based on perception. This new understanding creates the same effect, but this time it encompasses not only science, but humanity itself, its behavior, choices, and purpose in life. This new framework simultaneously presents a logical map of both external and internal worlds. People can no longer answer questions like, "How does the world work?" or "How should I live with this money?" Everything from missed choices to opportunities presented in daily life, from the search for meaning to the source of fears, is contained within this broader and more diverse perspective. Humans are not random beings tossed about in this chaos. They determine their own choices, the determinants of their consciousness. A person's way of life, the values they have held to date, and the intentions they have put into action directly shape their experience. Therefore, this understanding is not only a theoretical explanation, but also a practical guide to life. Because when a person realizes that the game cannot continue, they not only fail to survive, they fall into a trap and cannot develop. And this is where true transformation begins, because a person no longer blames external conditions, does not seek meaning outside, and stops fighting against things they cannot control. Instead, they see how their inner components, the reality in which they live, shape them. This awareness makes a person a more responsible, more compassionate, and more sensitive being. Life is no longer a struggle, but a learning environment, not a punishment, but a reward. In conclusion, the truth is this: reality is the experience of consciousness itself. A person is not a passive part of this experience. They are an active result. And for someone who realizes this, life stems not from broad and comprehensive growth, but from inner evolution. All roads lead there. To truly understand the subjective realm and the inner experience of the human being, it is first necessary to grasp the nature of consciousness, the source of this experience. For any explanation that does not analyze consciousness is limited to the visible surface and cannot offer a profound explanation of why reality does not appear as it seems. Therefore, a solid understanding must begin at the most fundamental level, with the question of what consciousness is, how it is presented, and why it is central to everything. From this perspective, consciousness is essentially not a phenomenon, but the foundation of existence. Material reality, the physical universe, and all the forms we perceive are derived constructs created by consciousness. The online world, where the international world is the true reality, is, at a deeper level, considered the reality of the participant. People often confuse what they see with absolute reality, but this is merely the result of identifying with an appearance derived from a more fundamental source. To dissipate reality solely through this appearance means cutting off the whole picture. This unity is considered a consequence of consciousness. That is, when consciousness is understood, it becomes explainable as a natural expression of physical relations. Many phenomena in physics that have long remained unanswered or have been accepted as merely ongoing events acquire economic meaning from this perspective. Results arising from probability, correspondence, or measurement are seen as the emergence of properties in the material world and the natural emergence of a consciousness-based system. The critical distinctions between them lie in defining the difference between what appears and what actually is. For most paradoxes stem from the assumption that they are the same thing. In this option, there is a single foundation. Consciousness exists. No other presuppositions are made. Everything is derived from this simple but powerful interval. Consciousness is considered without carrying the smallest structure. As explained by the change of application, here too, the smallest unit of reality is considered the cell of consciousness. This most fundamental level of consciousness is perfectly provided and makes the ability to choose possible. Although the definition seems simple, it leads to very detailed consequences. The system of choice is central to consciousness, because where there is choice, there is also time. There is a state before the choice and another state after the choice. Where there is the possibility of choice, information is received, processed, and combined. This requires temporary memory and processing processes. Therefore, consciousness naturally functions as an information system. There is an input field, a structure that compares this input with past experiences, makes sense of it, and then emerges. From this perspective, science is not merely a passive entity observing what is happening, but an active system shaped by reality. It is particularly important that the concepts used to describe this system are new and current, because older processes often carry religious, cultural, or ideological connotations and are entirely distracting. The expressions used here are for abstract understanding, not to describe everyday life, and should therefore be seen as metaphors. When speaking of consciousness, you encounter language problems, because language was primarily developed to describe the material world. When conducting a non-international process, we inevitably resort to analogies. At this point, an important distinction emerges. Consciousness cannot be produced by the brain. The brain acts as an interface in the field of experiential consciousness. However, it is not the source of consciousness. Even at the most basic level of consciousness, it requires the ability to distinguish at least two possibilities. Knowing a single state constitutes the completion of choice. The smallest unit of choice is the existence of two alternatives. This duality necessarily complements memory, because it is impossible to make sense of the next state without remembering the previous one. Without memory, every moment becomes the first moment, and in this state, no structure can be built. Consciousness develops through accumulation and comparison. Even at the simplest level, choice, time, memory, and information processing occur together. Therefore, even the smallest definition of consciousness includes concepts such as freedom, time, and evolution. From this perspective, reality appears only as a structure observed from the outside and is relived as a living process constantly shaped through consciousness. Having free will is essential because without free will, there is no true choice. If something happens as a consequence of something else and is not based on the individual's will, then there is no choice, only a spontaneous event. And it is precisely for this reason that we arrive at the formation in which man possesses free will. There is a before and an after, and with this comes consciousness. These three are not independent of each other, but rather fundamental functions necessary for everyone, and without one, the others are meaningless. When we consider consciousness as a system of knowledge and accept that this system evolves over time, the fundamental question arises: how does a conscious system of knowledge evolve? And on what principles does this evolution rest? If all the parts in a system of knowledge are completely random, the necessity of the definition is that the system does not contain true knowledge, because randomness implies the absence of order, meaning, and representation. But when this random, disordered formation of parts is put into a certain order, knowledge emerges. For example, by combining a few simple parts or symbols, by arranging a certain group, not only parts, but also an order, a structure, and a meaning are created. This order can be a number, a letter, or another symbol, and thus the system can now represent all of them. What is done in this process is to reorganize the entropy of the system, because entropy is the order of changes, and high entropy represents chaos, while low entropy represents order, because the transition from randomness to order is a fundamental evolutionary step of consciousness. Even in its simplest form, a consciousness cell capable of switching between two states possesses memory, because it can remember which state it was in before, which state it passed through afterwards, and that these transitions are repeated, and this memory carries the structure of consciousness. As these memory patterns multiply, more complex patterns emerge, and these patterns not only remain orderly, but also gain the ability to represent things. Thus, the transition from simple patterns to applications becomes almost inevitable. Mathematics is the logic of quantity, and the reason the physical world seems so powerful is that objective reality is composed entirely of measurable quantities. Although elements such as weight, volume, number, and structure can be expressed mathematically, the characteristics of personal experience are permanent. Human knowledge has two fundamental characteristics. One is the intellectual path based on logic and analysis, and the other is the path that allows for the holistic perception of details. However, modern culture, while glorifying the intellectual aspect, largely neglects the personal aspect. According to this model, the world exists not only as the world of creativity, but also as the world of all experiences learned spiritually and paranormally, and such phenomena never arise intellectually. The most basic stages of conscious processes begin to experience not only the time before and after the choice, but also a regular and rhythmic clock, expanding memories and patterns. This allows for the emergence of sequences, cycles, and increasingly complex structures. As complexity increases, disorder decreases, and at this point, the fundamental principle becomes clear. Consciousness, as a system of information, develops its entropy and produces meaning. This evolution is not limited to the sequencing of bits. What is truly important is the meaning, significance, and context carried by these small particles. And all more complex structures, from mathematics to physics, develop from this fundamental consciousness. This process can be approached in two different ways, and both approaches can lead to the same kind of proliferation. Either there is a single consciousness that constantly grows and retains all its memory, or numerous small, naturally occurring cells of consciousness come together to form a larger whole. Units of consciousness began to divide over time, first into 2, then 4, 8, and so on, eventually evolving into a vast, interconnected, cooperative, and shared structure. Much like trillions of cells coming together in biology to form a single organism. Some of these consciousness cells are structurally similar to bacteria, and in fact, when we look at the human body, we can say that our body is a complex ecosystem of trillions of microorganisms cooperating with each other. And our idea of consciousness lies precisely here, because consciousness is essentially an information system, and like any information system, it tends to evolve toward lower entropy states. It grows, develops, produces new orders and new meanings, but at some point it reaches a plateau because it needs new information to progress. Unless new evolutionary paths, new perspectives, new patterns, and different ways of perceiving reality emerge, a single mind, a single monolithic consciousness reaches its limits, because it can only think what it can think and cannot go beyond that. At this point, just as primitive single-celled organisms produce more complex life forms from within themselves, this large and holistic system of consciousness expands its capacity by creating subsets and fragments from within itself. From a computer science perspective, this is similar to the creation of a virtual machine. That is, the main system allocates a portion of its memory and processing power to create smaller, independently operating systems within itself, and thousands of people connecting to the same main computer and working in their own virtual spaces happens precisely on this logic. Each individual receives a small slice of memory, limited processing power, and certain permissions from the main system, thus becoming a virtual computer that exists within a larger whole but is also unique to itself. When these subsystems are given freedom of choice, that is, free will, each begins to produce its own experiences, and over time, these units differentiate from one another because different choices, different experiences, different perspectives, and different attitudes emerge. This diversity leads to the formation of thousands, tens of thousands, or even millions of individualized units of consciousness, each with free will. This, in turn, leads to disagreements, interactions, conflicts, and difficulties among them. All of this expands the set of possibilities extraordinarily. Since the possibilities possessed by a group are always far greater than those possessed by a single, unified consciousness, we approach the concept of we at this point. These individualized fragments can be called units of consciousness. Each is a subset of the larger system. They possess all the essential characteristics of the main system, but with less memory capacity, more limited processing power, and a smaller perspective. Therefore, they can evolve by reducing their entropy, but can never be as large or comprehensive as the main system. Yet, on their own scale, they can be equally meaningful, equally effective, and equally advanced. And that is precisely what we are: individualized units of consciousness. Through this process, the first virtual reality created by the system emerges. While the larger consciousness still exists, countless subconscious units with free will begin to live out their own experiences, thus creating a virtual world. Reality is fundamentally a set of rules, and everyone participating in this game must abide by the rules that define this virtual reality. The first virtual reality consisted of rules of communication. Since communicating with each other required vocabulary, syntax, symbols, and shared meanings, and without these rules, no unit of consciousness could understand another. The rules could be changed and improved, but a framework for communication was absolutely necessary. The second virtual reality was a more complex structure, encompassing all individualized units of consciousness with free will. And the primary goal here was to reduce entropy by making better choices. Because consciousness works this way, as an information system, it evolves by reducing its entropy. However, in an environment where everyone could speak simultaneously and interaction was limitless, this process was quite slow. Therefore, the larger system of consciousness decided to create a new virtual reality with much stricter rules to accelerate development. A system where every interaction must be defined and every action must be able to affect all other entities. This is precisely the kind of virtual reality we call the physical universe, a highly interactive system with strict rules defined by energy, momentum, and state vectors. In this universe, no action is isolated. When something moves, an energy exchange occurs that affects its surroundings, and its surroundings react to it. Every interaction creates a change, and this change propagates through a chain reaction. This virtual reality, just like simulations created in a computer environment, is initiated by defining a set of rules and initial conditions. The start button is pressed, and the system is allowed to develop according to the defined rules. This is what we have been doing in computer science labs for years. We define the rules and initial conditions, start the system, and observe where it goes. When we change the rules or conditions, we get completely different results. In this context, the initial conditions were a plasma state with high temperature and high pressure, and when the system became active, it began to expand according to predetermined rules. This process can be called the Big Digital Explosion. The expansion of the universe, the formation of stars, planets, and complex structures are the natural consequences of this simulation, and thus our reality has evolved as a system built upon a set of rules and initial conditions. The task of scientists is to discover the rules of this virtual reality, to understand which action leads to which result, to determine which behaviors are possible and which are impossible. Because within this framework of rules, for example, we cannot fly by extending our arms, or we suffer physical damage when we fall off a cliff. This damage affects our memory, our mobility, and our behavior. And all of these are natural consequences of the system's rules. And this virtual reality continued to evolve until it eventually became complex enough to develop conscious beings within itself. This process continued through evolution. Stars formed, the sun rose, planets took shape, Earth emerged, and then biological life sprouted. First it developed, then plants, animals, and finally humans. All these beings, constantly interacting and evolving, lost their entropy. It is precisely at this point that a distinction can be made between the decrease in entropy and love, because there is a direct link between the release of entropy and love. To illustrate this, let's swap two people with the same future and place them in two different environments in this region. Let's call the first group the love group, a group of individuals who care for each other, help each other, and find the best solutions for everyone, not just their own interests. Let's call the second group the fear group. Individuals in this group are insecure, anxious, constantly feel the need to protect themselves, and evaluate everything through the lens of personal gain. Now let's allow these two groups to evolve over time and observe their expansion directions. Predicting which group has lower and which has higher entropy is actually quite simple. A loving group learns to use the resources they have in the most efficient way for everyone. They cooperate, share, overcome problems with common solutions, and thus optimize the whole. This is a low entropy solution. On the other hand, a timid, individualistic group tries to solve problems with initial solutions. They seize the resources of individuals, act selfishly, and engage in conflict to protect what they have. Over time, the power of the parts diverges, and they begin to form smaller groups. These groups unite to suppress others. When one group gains power, another group gathers strength to defend against it, and this process continues to grow. The resulting structure is a system based on attack and defense, constantly creating conflict. In fact, what is prevalent in the world today largely reflects the evolutionary characteristics of this sphere. Nation-states, power blocks, wars of interest, and constant competition. Who can obtain how many resources and for how long? The system is shaped around these questions. Such a structure is highly entropy-driven due to the inadequate allocation of resources, inefficient solutions, and the emergence of great inequalities. A very small portion of the population controls a large part of the majority, while the rest occupy the lower echelons of the majority's power. This picture clearly shows that consciousness can best be understood as an information system, and this information system has evolved to reduce its entropy. Consciousness, at its core, evolves toward love. It progresses toward cooperation, compassion, and sharing. This is the appearance of development. Consciousness makes choices, and these choices accumulate. Love increases awareness of personal choices, while fear reverses this. Thus, a model of consciousness emerges that possesses free will and can evolve or stagnate depending on the choices it makes. Now let's re-examine this understanding with the existence of virtual reality. Within this evolving virtual reality, monkeys, humans, whales, and countless other species emerge. They can remain in all countries. So how is consciousness acquired? How does consciousness arise? Individualized units of consciousness, that is, subcomponents of consciousness, receive a share of consciousness from the system and bind this share to an avatar. However, the system ensures that meaningful, ethical, and licensed choices continue to be made between the low and high entropy choices of these avatars. Therefore, the process extends to human consciousness. Humans emerge as avatars capable of making these choices. Of course, the system sometimes alters its process, because when things don't go as planned, when the desired results are not achieved, minor adjustments are made. But in general, you need to allow the process to proceed in its own course, because in this way, everything happens. Every event becomes part of a cause and effect chain, and nothing is permanent instantly or without reason. This perspective also shows us who we are. We are parts of consciousness and bound to a human avatar. This avatar, like a character in a computer game, is occupied by the system. In the virtual reality game you play, there are only two things: the computer and the player. The characters, worlds, creators, and stories in the game are merely a visual and experiential presentation written by the computer. The goal of the game is to transform complex data into a meaningful visual and enable players to understand what is happening. The universal point of light, color, detail, and location information on the screen takes on meaning in your mind as rivers, houses, characters, and roads. There are rules. You have to turn a lever to open a door. Certain actions lead to certain consequences, and you play the game by following these rules. This actually shows how our reality has evolved. We are in a virtual reality. Consciousness is an information system that functions like a computer, taking a piece from within itself and structuring it as the image processing engine of this virtual reality. In this way, hidden beings can make choices with meaningful and significant consequences. Through these choices, they either evolve toward love or regress toward fear. This is the general model. And while this narrative may seem crazy at first glance, these choices were not arrived at by combining random choices. These insights are the result of the profound interaction of individuals engaged in years of research, experience, and intellectual work. The framework presented here rests on the assumption that consciousness is not a derived phenomenon, but the fundamental element that makes reality itself possible. Because when it is observed that reality exhibits an information-based structure, it becomes inevitable to conclude that this information is processed not randomly, but by a larger system organized according to specific rules. This shows that the universe in which time, space, and matter are experienced is not a self-contained structure, but a functional subfield of a larger system of consciousness. In this context, the existence we experience as individuals is not an identity detached from the whole. Rather, it is the experiential realm of individualized units of consciousness derived from the same system, differing only in perspective and field of experience. Within this framework, the concept of evolution refers not to a biological process, but to a qualitative change in consciousness. That is, a transformation process progressing from fear-based perceptions to perceptions based on love and wholeness. When this transformation occurs, disorder in the system decreases, and consciousness evolves into a more coherent state with lower entropy. On the surface, the differences between people are quite pronounced. Different cultures, different backgrounds, different memories, and different patterns of perception. However, this diversity is only a separation that arises at the level of experience. Deep down, there is a common ground upon which all these differences are built. This ground is the source of the sense of self that everyone directly experiences in their own inner awareness. This awareness is independent of personal stories and constitutes the common ground shared among individuals. Therefore, the feeling of separation does not stem from consciousness itself, but from the content experienced within consciousness. The content is variable. However, awareness remains the same. When this awareness is directly observed, it becomes clear that separation is largely a product of perception and that similarities far outweigh differences. The phrase, "we are all one," ceases to be a symbolic expression at this point and defines a structural truth about the functioning of the system. The process of reaching this understanding has been shaped not only by intuitive acceptance, but also by long-term analytical and experimental research. The habit of modeling reality through the disciplines of logic, mathematics, and physics is already strong. However, over time, it has been realized that knowing can occur not only through reason, but also through intuition. These two paths are not opposed, but complementary. Through the practice of meditation, it has been experienced that the usual limitations of the mind can be overcome, and knowledge normally assumed to be inaccessible can emerge directly in the realm of awareness. This knowledge emerges not through inference or analysis, but as a state of knowing. It is like knowing why something is wrong without thinking about it, an awareness that can be explained later, but which arises instantly. This shows that knowledge is not acquired solely through physical means or senses, that a broader data field exists, and that consciousness has the capacity to access this field directly. Since physical objects, machines, and processes are also part of this system, the information they carry is also part of the same whole. Therefore, consciousness can interact not only with its own mental content, but also with the information field in which the system operates. If the reality we experience is a processed virtual structure, the existence of a database containing information about past events, the present, and possible futures is essential for the sustainability of this structure. Because the system does not follow a deterministic chain when creating the next moment, it chooses from probability distributions. For this, it needs to possess knowledge of the entire probability space. Throughout history, concepts called Akashic records in different cultures are intuitively perceived expressions of this necessary information field. This information field exists not because it is special or mystical, but because it is necessary for the functioning of the system. Since consciousness is also a part of this system, it can access this information under appropriate conditions. This access occurs not through mental effort or analytical thinking, but through intuitive orientation. Like asking a question to a database, consciousness sets an intention. An answer is received, the intention is refined and the information gradually becomes clearer. The determining factor here is intention. Intention is the driving force of consciousness. Just as force is crucial in physics, so too is intention crucial in consciousness. Therefore, healing through intention, access to knowledge through intention, and observation of past experiences through intention are all possible. Because the individual is not merely a physical body. They are a local expression of a larger consciousness and naturally have the right to access the potential offered by this realm of consciousness. Everything that follows will be built upon this fundamental framework. In subsequent chapters, how this structure is transformed into a coherent model, how it aligns with physical reality, and how it can be experimentally tested will be addressed much more carefully and step by step. The emphasis here is on the idea that consciousness is not merely a general phenomenon at the center, but rather the very essence of reality, a unity where truth resides. We can arrive at the understanding that the universe, which we perceive as limited by time, space, and matter, is actually a numerical structure of information operating within a larger system of consciousness. Within this structure, individuals, though appearing as separate entities, essentially exist as brain units derived from the same system, differing only in their areas of experience. While people's ethnic origins, personal histories, memories, and illusions may superficially separate them, what lies in common behind these differences is the sense of self that everyone experiences in their own enduring realm. This universal, individualized unit of consciousness generally originates from a common source. Therefore, the phrase, "we are all one," is not a romantic expression, but a highly accurate description of the system's abundance. The process of arriving at this understanding involved not only observations or spiritual experiences, but also a highly analytical and detached journey. As a scientist trained in nuclear physics, I first experienced how progress was made through intelligence and logic, then through planning and scientific programs, which proved to be broadly useful and functional, at least logically. During meditation, the direct access to the physical manifestation of the demonstration, the instantaneous knowledge of errors in such punched cards in a mental way, showed that it wasn't acquired solely through physical means, but rather through a larger data set available and directly accessible. This clearly reveals that it was obtained through intuition, not through survival. This larger data set accumulates the success necessary for the sustainability of a virtual reality, and the system makes random selections from these probability distributions while determining the details of the next moment. The concept described in ancient cultures as the Akashic records actually consists of a definition of where this necessary storehouse of information is stored. The reason geometric shapes and symmetrical structures are commonly maintained in these experiences is that they are not so much direct carriers of information, but rather powerful metaphors for regularity, improvements, and intentionality. Because symmetry does not arise from disorder, and the mind symbolically perceives the structural integrity of the larger system of consciousness through regular geometric forms. Therefore, experiences from consciousness are often conveyed not directly and explicitly, but through metaphors. Consciously constructed things often manifest as images and narratives requiring interpretation, such as the symbolic expression of lived dreams and inner growth. All these experiences have clarified the boundaries of a reality not limited to the physical world, clarifying for a physicist the concept of reality, not only in terms of matter and energy, but also in terms of consciousness and knowledge. Thus, after years of continuous observation, sales, and scientific analysis, it has become clear that even phenomena presented as paranormal are actually based on a single fundamental principle: the fundamental principle of consciousness. Look at what you've done. What choices were made during this time? What reactions did you have? Did you feel pressure? Or did you allow everything to unfold naturally? This observation is the most concrete way to measure your alignment with the entropy reduction efficiency of your conscious system. It's not just a matter of visual distortion. You need to test its inertia in your actions and decisions as well. This isn't limited to the physical daily part. It can be achieved in real life too. Your choices, your clothes, and your intentions also influence the effects of this pattern. The motivation behind your thoughts and actions reflects the order of your conscious system. The less resistance it offers and the more flow it allows, the more efficiently the system operates. From this perspective, life is a learning environment. Mistakes, wrong results, or failed attempts are lessons given to reduce entropy. No mistake is a punishment. Rather, it is an inevitable part of the learning process. The lesson learned from each mistake contributes to the evolution of consciousness and reveals possibilities for the system to work more efficiently. In this context, our interactions with people are also subject to the same principles. Instead of judging, seeing an individual experience something at their own level of knowledge reduces entropy. The moment you stop judging people, you begin to accept what is in their reality as it is. This allows for the advancement of both personal and collective consciousness development. Acting with a consciousness based on love is not merely an emotional choice. It is a direct contribution to the self-optimization function. A person acting in this way encounters less resistance in their daily life, makes clearer decisions, and adapts to their natural environment. Happiness and peace are byproducts of this process. The ultimate goal is to minimize the entropy of the consciousness system. This entropy reduction process allows a person to become harmonious with the system through their death, decisions, and intentions. This harmony creates a sense of order and meaning that develops and emerges. Every moment of life is observed with this harmonious consciousness. Choices are no longer accidental, but become steps of service stored somewhere. Therefore, looking back at your past week or day is not just about remembering the past. It is also a mirror that allows you to advance the entropy reduction process. Which choices, actions, and intentions brought you closer to balance and harmony? Which mistakes and errors taught you lessons? Accessing these fragments is a tangible way for the conscious system to piece together the experience and understanding of its own inner independence. Reaching the point of breaking down negative entropy is fundamental to understanding your self-awareness. Observing expressions like sadness, anger, misunderstanding, stress, and resentment allows you to measure your personal entropy and the harmony of your conscious system. Most people constantly experience negative emotions. Even daily news or different perspectives trigger these developments. However, the number of negative situations can be reduced. Being in a negative emotional relationship for a long time indicates a low entropy policy. The source of negativity is not external. It is entirely intertwined with your internal fears, prejudices, and beliefs. No one can anger you, upset you, or cause you to experience negative emotions. These happen at home or in your subconscious. Getting rid of fears, ego, and trap beliefs ensures the preservation of true happiness and productivity. In this case, life ends not with expected or accidental successes, but by minimizing entropy and transforming it into love. The sole purpose of life is to minimize entropy through choices and experiences. In this process, the focus is not on controlling or wanting the outcome, but on accepting the current situation and responding in some way. Choosing a low-entropy path involves viewing mistakes and wrong decisions as learning opportunities. Making mistakes and identifying incorrect errors is a natural part of the conscious system completing its own evolution. The development of the conscious system begins primarily with knowing your own mind. Meditation is a classic and effective method for this personal acquaintance. Calming the mind, observing, and learning to exist in your own field of consciousness independently of the outside world provides clarity in development. In this process, intention is the power of consciousness. With focused intention, it becomes possible to gather data from the system, experience non-physical realms, and develop abilities. Meditation is not always the only way. It is used as an alternative to help individuals whose central nervous system is overactive or who suppress the clearing of personal memory. Imagination is a powerful tool for reaching awareness of information. In this method, a detailed and auditorily rich scene is created in the mind. All senses are activated. For example, the sound of waves on the beach, the texture of the sand, and the chirping of birds. The events on stage reveal the characters and the story. Thus, consciousness begins to independently gather data and create new experiences. This process accelerates the evolution of the conscious system by allowing the capacity for expansion and openness to work together. When practiced regularly, the individual is cleansed of negative emotions, learns to make measured choices, and becomes more harmonious, productive, and loving in life. Life events stem not from the events themselves, but from dispersed headaches and the conscious system's effectiveness in reducing entropy. The people you encounter and the things they say are things your mind has already grasped or pondered. The larger system of consciousness takes this story you've created, processes it, and directs it to areas where you need to learn. This is a replica of gaining experience in non-physical realms, renewed by both change and imagination. Imagination, in particular, serves as a tool for experiencing something new. Its ability to rapidly activate cells, silence the mind, and act with intention allows for a transfer within seconds, followed by action. Even if you appear constantly undisturbed, if you are detached, you are already in a constant state of awareness. This allows you to separate sensory data from your mind and have a vast field of decision-making. Most people make decisions solely through the interaction of their memories and sensory perceptions. However, those who learn to use the informational and intellectual realms together can operate in a richer and more comprehensive field of knowledge. The intuitive realm contains far more information than the physical realm, and mastering this realm creates a more holistic state of consciousness with its broad, accessible, and informative aspects. Intuitive and competing aspects complement each other. The intuitive side gathers information. The intellectual side evaluates and analyzes it. The regional side comes into play. This process gives you a broader experience of reality and a more effective decision-making ability. You can quickly gather information about a person you meet, understand many things, and use the remaining information to help that person. This is possible through the interaction of both repair and restoration. Consciousness, through three fundamental streams. The larger system of consciousness allows for dimensional data analysis and enables you to connect with all thoughts. Communication from consciousness to consciousness. Others can send you messages or implant thoughts. You can create your own fragment of consciousness by creating your own virtual realities and information. It is impossible to fully understand the development of these three streams. There is always doubt. Through experience, you can learn how certain information is formed and gain the ability to learn. The fundamental criterion in your approach to information is not its reality, but its usefulness. Is this information necessary for your development and learning? In conclusion, the only true reality is sleep, which is a system of information. Information constitutes the essence of reality. All other experiences and worlds are virtual realities, and life, learning, and development take place within these virtual realities. When you die, you pass into a different virtual reality. Consciousness is the fundamental reality in which existence is sustained and continuously experienced. Dreaming, daydreaming, or having out-of-body experiences are being in different virtual realities. These experiences occur in spaces you create yourself or explore through your mind. The critical point here is that these are comprehensive metaphors for reality. The larger system of consciousness, individual consciousness, and units of free will, each fulfilling its own function. The important thing is not to take these metaphors as complete reality, but to understand how they are learned and developed. Consciousness is a living and conscious system in itself. To understand it, it would be wrong to break it down into parts or to concretize it. The important thing is to share your relationship with consciousness, to observe how you allow it to help you. Experience is the foundation of learning. If information or a theory hasn't been verified by your own experience, it's merely someone else's truth and won't contribute to your development. Therefore, while it's common to invent stories and rely on them, true progress is only possible through your own experiences. The path to growth and development lies in evaluating knowledge with an open mind and skepticism. Test your experiences, observe whether they work, and only through this process naturally assess valid truths. Virtues like good knowledge only gain value when acquired through inner experience. Details learned from the mind or external pressure do not lead to true development. In short, acquiring knowledge and possessing intellectual qualities through experience with your own consciousness is a far deeper and more personal reality. Approaching everything, especially personal matters, with skepticism is a critical step in the process of growth. People often tend to exaggerate their own perceptions and realities. Therefore, skepticism both breaks down prejudices and allows us to see reality more accurately. A large part of the universe consists of non-physical realities. Understanding the difference between international matter reality, PMR, and non-physical matter reality, NPMR, provides a deeper understanding of our consciousness and experiences. For example, we can communicate with frequencies that can be visualized through our devices. This shows the physical boundaries of the universe. Paranormal experiences, remote sensing, or life after death are also parts of the same broader consciousness, and are all intentionally directed. Practices like healing or energy work are merely tools. The real power is on the plane of the mind. Things like chakras, energy rods, and auras are instructive tools, gifts used to concretize something abstract. It would be wrong to view information as concrete facts. It only helps us understand them. The important thing is to equip your experiences with your own awareness and make them a part of your own reality. Other people's plans or life plans only provide reference. True learning comes from your own experiences. To realize consciousness and reality, you need to center your intention and experience rather than trying to concretize abstract concepts. Out-of-body experiences are a tool for transcending the limitations of the mind and separating non-physical realities. The body is merely an avatar. The real you is a part of your consciousness. Therefore, the power of mind and intention is far more important than the tools themselves. Concepts like the body, the subtle body, the spiritual body are actually metaphors and tools. They help us understand information and experiences, but they are not a concrete summary of realities. Throughout history, people have created such symbolic models. For example, the silver cord, chakras, while trying to understand the relationship between mind and body. These tools help us interpret data and synthesize our experiences, but they are not absolute reality themselves. For example, things like the aura, chakras, and energy bodies are ways of visualizing or making sense of data. People may see them in different ways or make their own interpretations. What matters is using the tools that yield results. Tools help us understand our experience, but the real power lies in intention and consciousness itself. Different cultures and traditions use different tools. Tibetan Buddhists, Zen, Aboriginal people, etc. This doesn't mean they are inadequate. It simply means the methods and tools differ. The important thing is to place awareness and experience beyond the individual, at the center, to see them as instructive tools, and to integrate them into your own experience. Meditation experiences can allow us to reach a deeper resolution with consciousness. For example, some instruments, such as hand panels, can transform and elevate one's awareness, both while playing and listening. These experiences allow one to transcend one's own self and integrate with a larger system of consciousness. This integration is instantaneous, a formation of individual identity. There is no longer a self, only existence as a part of it. One merges with everything, from a blade of grass to a tree, feeling pure love and connection. This experience is a transformative period in life and gives one a sense of peace, happiness, and fulfillment. No physical or complex techniques are needed to reach such an experience. It is enough to let go of fears, ego, and ingrained beliefs. It is enough to completely open the mind to existence. Throughout this experience, surrendering to life and relinquishing unnecessary desires for control is crucial. In terms of renewal, you adapt to what reality offers, and this adaptation brings profound satisfaction and transformation. Years of self-care and practice, patience, and continuous progress make this possible. Adding value to the development of the experience and trusting in society is more effective than trying to control one's own intelligence. This process consists of a lifelong process of dissolution. Learning never ends. Letting go. Often, things go wrong when you try to live and work according to your own perfect vision. Experience shows that allowing the process to self-optimize without interference is the best approach. Humility and acceptance. Even if your own knowledge and intelligence always give the right answer, this makes you more humble. This allows people to choose their own paths, which leads to more positive outcomes, both in their own areas and in their natural analysis. Allowing others to go their own way. People are doing the best they can with the resources they have. Pressuring them or misunderstanding them will backfire. Instead, being kind and free encourages their growth and development. Models and reality. We need to disseminate models to build our own understanding. These models help us organize our experiences and beliefs. However, they should not be seen as absolute truth. Authenticity allows you to develop your own model, to create your own realities and experiences within your individuality. Authenticity allows you to develop your own model, to create your own realities and experiences within your individuality. Authenticity and the experience of consciousness. Consciousness works in conjunction with culture and intention. Tools like chakras or silver cords are merely helpful metaphors. They are not reality. What matters is experiencing the situation and increasing your own concentration. Understanding life and joining the flow. It truly begins with allowing the world and people to move in their own ways. Accepting the life circumstances presented, regardless of your ego and beliefs, and accepting yourself and others. Important insight. What is real and our role in this reality emerges at the most fundamental level of our lives. This allows us to feel safe by accepting both ourselves and the world as they are. The purpose and focus of existence. The purpose of being here is to be able to make choices at home and develop preferences between love and fear. Understanding this is a critical step in clarifying the meaning of life and our own role. The role of metaphors. Different people use different metaphors for reality. Some, like computer scientists, can easily understand this through frameworks, but everyone can reach this awareness in their own language and with their own tools. What matters is not the story itself, but allowing oneself to understand and experience the story. Evolution. Towards love, consciousness evolves entropy. Our fundamental goal is to eliminate entropy, that is, to organize it by concealing it and transforming it into love. A consciousness free from ego and beliefs, with low entropy, represents pure love and compassion. The relativity of reality. Everyone experiences their own reality, and this reality is as real as your reality. It is necessary to respect the tools others use without judgment. There is no right or wrong, only tools that suit you. The evolution of tools. Initially, rituals like meditation may be necessary. However, the need for tools gradually diminishes, and eventually, simply existing becomes sufficient. Tools are auxiliary devices that support the experience, but the experience itself is fundamental. Humanity's spiritual acceleration. Human history has progressed very slowly, but thanks to technology, communication, and information sharing, spiritual and conscious evolution has now become a much faster process. Steps that took thousands of years in the past can now be taken in a shorter time. The knee point of the curve. Historically, humanity now has a knee point, a critical acceleration point before reaching the peak. At this point, it becomes possible to make great spiritual strides and leaps in the evolution of consciousness towards love.